Find yourself in a place of deep comfort. Perhaps you're nestled beneath soft blankets or reclining in your favorite chair, the world outside growing quieter with each passing moment. Take a slow breath in, then let it go. Feel the weight of the day dissolving like morning mist under the sun. Your body grows heavier, sinking deeper into rest with every exhale. The concerns that filled your mind earlier have drifted away, leaving space for something ancient, something timeless. Tonight, we journey together to a world that existed long before ours, to the sun-drenched hills of ancient Greece, where gods walked among mortals and heroes faced impossible trials. These are stories that have echoed through thousands of years, tales told around flickering fires, painted on pottery, carved into temple walls. As you settle into this peaceful state, let these ancient voices reach across the centuries to find you here, now, ready to carry you into the realm of myth and legend. Close your eyes if they aren't closed already. Breathe deeply. And let us begin where all things begin, in the darkness before creation itself. Before the earth existed, before the sky stretched overhead, before light divided from darkness, there was only chaos. Not the chaos we think of today, with its sense of disorder and confusion, but rather a vast emptiness, a yawning void where nothing had yet taken form. Imagine it if you can. No ground beneath your feet, no horizon to gaze upon, no stars to guide you through the darkness, just infinite nothingness, pregnant with possibility, waiting for the first spark of existence to ignite. From this primordial void, the first beings emerged, not born but simply coming into existence as if they had always been there, waiting for their moment. First came Gaia, the Earth Mother, the wide-bosomed foundation of all that would follow. She was not merely a goddess, but the very embodiment of the earth itself, every mountain and valley, every forest and plain. When Gaia took form, reality itself began to solidify, giving substance to the void that had come before. Gaia's arrival marked the true beginning of creation. She was vast and fertile, powerful beyond measure, the source from which all life would spring. Alone in the new existence, she created her first children without the need for a partner. From her own essence, she brought forth Uranus, the starry sky, to cover her on every side and provide an eternal home for the blessed immortals yet to come. She also created the mountains, great peaks that rose from her surface like sleeping giants, and Pontus, the deep and endless sea that would surround the lands she formed. But Uranus was different from the mountains and the sea. He was her equal, capable of consciousness and will, and he spread himself across the heavens, matching Gaia's earth below. When day gave way to night, Uranus would descend to embrace Gaia, and from their union, the first generation of divine beings came into the world. These were the Titans, 12 mighty gods and goddesses who represented the fundamental forces of the universe. First came Oceanus, the great river that the ancients believed encircled the entire world, his waters flowing in an endless loop at the boundaries of existence. Then Coeus and Crius, whose domains touched the mysteries of intellect and the heavens. Hyperion arrived, a being of dazzling light who would father the sun, moon, and dawn. Iaptus came forth, ancestor of Prometheus and Atlas, whose descendants would play crucial roles in the drama yet to unfold. Among the female titans there was Thea, who would give birth to celestial lights, and Rhea, destined to become the mother of gods. Themis embodied divine law and order, while Mnemosyne became the personification of memory itself. Phoebe shone with silvery radiance, and Tethys ruled over the nourishing waters of the earth. Finally, there was Cronus, the youngest and most cunning of the Titans, whose very name would become synonymous with time itself. But the Titans were not the only children of Gaia and Uranus. The Earth Mother also gave birth to the Cyclopes, 3 brothers, each possessing a single eye in the center of their foreheads. Brontes, Steropes, and Arges were master craftsmen, and they would one day forge weapons of unimaginable power for the gods. Following them came the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, creatures of awesome and terrible might. Each of these three brothers, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, possessed 50 heads and 100 arms, making them formidable beyond description. Yet, for all the wonder of these creations, darkness crept into paradise. Uranus looked upon the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires with disgust and fear. Their monstrous forms offended him, and their strength threatened his supremacy. In his pride and cruelty, he refused to let them see the light of day. As soon as they were born, he seized them and thrust them back into Gaia's depths, imprisoning them in the darkest pit of Tartarus, a realm of suffering far below the Earth's surface. Gaia groaned under the weight of these imprisoned children, her body aching with their confinement. The pain was not merely physical, but emotional, for what mother could bear to have her children torn from her and cast into eternal darkness? As her anguish grew, so did her anger at Uranus for his cruelty. She could no longer remain passive while her husband tyrannized their offspring. In her rage and sorrow, Gaia conceived a plan. From her own substance, she created a great sickle of adamantine, a metal harder than any other, with an edge that could cut through anything, even divine flesh. She gathered her Titan children to her and revealed her plan, asking which among them had the courage to stand against their father and free their imprisoned siblings. Silence greeted her plea. The Titans, despite their power, feared Uranus's wrath. He was the sky itself, all-encompassing and inescapable. To raise a hand against him seemed not just dangerous, but impossible. They looked at one another, each hoping someone else would volunteer, but none dared to speak. All except one. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, stepped forward. Perhaps it was ambition that drove him, a desire to claim power for himself. Perhaps it was genuine outrage at his father's tyranny. Or perhaps it was simply that he, being the youngest, had less to lose than his elder siblings. Whatever his motivation, he took the adamantine sickle from his mother's hands and vowed to end Uranus's reign. Gaia helped her son prepare an ambush. She instructed him on where to hide and when to strike, for she knew her husband's habits well. That evening, as Uranus descended from the heavens to embrace Gaia in the darkness, Cronus lay in wait. The sky god came, spreading himself over the earth, bringing night with his presence, unsuspecting of the betrayal that awaited him. In that moment, as Uranus lowered himself to mate with Gaia, Cronus sprang from his hiding place. With the adamantine sickle grasped firmly in his hands, he struck. The blade cut through divine flesh, and Cronus severed his father's genitals, casting them far out into the sea. The cry that Uranus released in that moment echoed across creation, a sound of pain and fury and disbelief. From the drops of blood that fell onto Gaia's earth, 3 new races sprang into being. The giants emerged, fierce warriors who would one day challenge the gods themselves. The Erinyes materialized, 3 avenging goddesses of retribution who would pursue those who committed terrible crimes, especially crimes against family. And the Melii arose, gentle ash tree nymphs who would inhabit the forests of the world. But the most remarkable birth came from the severed genitals themselves. They fell into the sea, and the waters churned and frothed around them. White foam spread across the waves, and from this foam arose Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Born from violence yet embodying grace, she rose from the sea on a shell, fully formed and breathtakingly beautiful, destined to wield power over the hearts of both gods and mortals alike. With Uranus defeated and withdrawn from the world, either dying or retreating to some distant realm beyond mortal knowledge, Cronus claimed the throne of the cosmos. The age of Uranus had ended, and the age of the Titans had begun. Cronus freed his monstrous siblings from Tartarus, or so the story sometimes goes, though other versions claim he imprisoned them once again, perpetuating the very crime that had led to his father's overthrow. He married his sister Rhea, and together they ruled over what many would later call a golden age, a time of peace and prosperity, when the world was young and unmarred by the conflicts that would later tear it apart. Yet as Cronus sat upon his throne savoring his victory, his father's final words haunted him. Uranus, in his agony and rage, had cursed his son, prophesying that just as Cronus had overthrown him, so too would Cronus be overthrown by his own offspring. the youngest would become strongest, and the cycle of violence and usurpation would continue. Cronus heard this curse and felt fear grip his heart. He who had struck down his father now knew that somewhere in the future, one of his own children would do the same to him. This fear would shape everything that followed, setting in motion events that would transform the cosmos once again. The prophecy haunted Cronus through every moment of his reign. Each time Rhea grew heavy with child, that ancient curse echoed in his mind. One of his children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Uranus. The thought consumed him, transforming the mighty Titan King into something paranoid and monstrous. He had tasted power, and he would not surrender it, not to fate, not to prophecy, and certainly not to his own offspring. When Rhea gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Hestia, Cronus seemed to greet the moment with joy. But as Rhea held her newborn close, exhausted and radiant with motherhood, Cronus approached. Before Rhea could comprehend his intention, he seized the infant from her arms. In one swift, horrific motion, he opened his mouth and swallowed the child whole. Hestia, goddess of the hearth, barely moments old, vanished into her father's gullet, alive, but imprisoned in the Titan's belly. Rhea's scream of anguish shook the heavens, but Cronus was unmoved. The prophecy demanded this, he told himself. By keeping his children within him, never allowing them to grow and challenge his power, he could circumvent fate itself. When Rhea bore her second child, Demeter, the scene repeated itself. The mother's pleas meant nothing to the paranoid king. Down went Demeter, goddess of the harvest, joining her sister in that terrible darkness. One by one, Rhea's children were devoured. Hera, who would have been queen of gods, disappeared into Cronus's maw. Hades, lord of the dead, followed his sisters. Poseidon, destined to rule the seas, was swallowed before he could draw his first breath as a separate being from his mother. 5 children, 5 swallows, 5 lives stolen before they could begin. The children remained alive inside their father, conscious but trapped, growing despite their prison, waiting in darkness for a liberation they couldn't imagine. Rhea's grief transformed into bitter determination. When she felt the 6th child quickening in her womb, she knew she could not bear to lose another. This time would be different. She sought out her mother, the ancient Gaia, whose wisdom had overthrown Uranus. Together, the 2 goddesses conceived a plan to save this last child, and perhaps free all the rest. As Rhea's time approached, Gaia helped her steal away to the island of Crete, far from Cronus's watchful eyes. In a sacred cave on Mount Ida, hidden among the whispering trees and protected by the earth itself, Rhea gave birth to her youngest son. She named him Zeus, and as she held him for the first time, she saw in his infant eyes the destiny that Cronus feared. This child would indeed overthrow his father. This child would become king of gods and men. But first, he had to survive. Rhea wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes, bundling it to feel like a newborn's weight. She returned to Cronus with this deception cradled in her arms. The Titan King, perhaps blinded by his own paranoia or perhaps simply accustomed to his terrible ritual, didn't scrutinize the bundle too closely. He seized it from Rhea and swallowed it whole, believing he had consumed his 6th and final child. The stone settled in his belly alongside his living children, and Cronus breathed easier, convinced he had defeated the prophecy at last. Meanwhile, on Crete, the infant Zeus was raised in secret. Nymphs cared for him, and the divine goat Amalthea nursed him with her milk. When the baby cried, as all babies do, a group of warriors called the Curetes would dance and clash their spears against their shields, creating such a din that Cronus, far away, could never hear his hidden son's voice. Zeus grew in that cave, nurtured by Gaia's earth and protected by loyal guardians, growing stronger and more powerful with each passing day. The years turned, and Zeus matured into a young god of extraordinary power and cunning. He learned of his true parentage, of his siblings imprisoned in their father's belly, and of the prophecy that bound his fate. He understood that he was meant to challenge Cronus, but he was not foolish. The Titan King remained powerful, surrounded by his brothers and sisters, the other Titans who had helped establish his rule. Zeus needed allies, and he knew exactly where to find them. His first action was to return to his mother Rhea, revealing himself to her. Their reunion was tearful and joyful, mother and son together at last. Rhea, who had mourned this child for years while pretending he was devoured, now saw him grown and magnificent. She was more than willing to help him free his siblings and overthrow the tyrant who had caused her so much pain. Together, they prepared a concoction, a powerful emetic that would force even a Titan to vomit. Some stories say the Oceanid Metis, goddess of wisdom and cunning, helped create this potion. Rhea brought it to Cronus, perhaps disguised as wine, perhaps as medicine, perhaps as some treat to celebrate their years of rule. Cronus, suspecting nothing from his long-suffering wife, consumed it. The effect was immediate and violent. Cronus's body convulsed, and he began to vomit. First came the stone, the one Rhea had wrapped to look like baby Zeus. It flew from his mouth and landed on the earth, where it would later become a sacred monument at Delphi, a testament to the trick that saved the gods. But the stone was just the beginning. Next came Poseidon, now fully grown, emerging from his father's gullet, ready for battle. Then Hades appeared, grim and powerful, lord of the underworld, even before that realm existed. Hera came forth, regal and furious, followed by Demeter, and finally Hestia. All 5 children stood before their father, no longer infants, but mighty gods in their own right. Years of growth having occurred even within their prison. Cronus stared at them in horror and disbelief, understanding in that instant that the prophecy he had tried so desperately to avoid had come to pass after all. Zeus stepped forward to join his siblings, 6 gods arrayed against their father, and the young Olympian spoke the words that would echo through eternity. His father's reign was over, but Cronus would not surrender easily. He called upon his brothers and sisters, the Titans who had ruled alongside him, Oceanus and Tethys, Hyperion and Thea, Coos and Phoebe, Creus and his brothers. Most of the ancient generation rallied to Cronus's banner. A few notable Titans stood apart. Oceanus, the great river, remained neutral, perhaps seeing the wisdom in not opposing the younger gods. Themis, goddess of divine law, could see that justice lay with Zeus and his cause. Most importantly, the Titan Prometheus, whose very name meant forethought, could perceive the future well enough to know that Zeus would prevail. He and his brother Prometheus joined the younger gods, lending their considerable power to the rebellion. The stage was set for the most terrible war the cosmos had ever witnessed. The gods made their base on Mount Olympus, a peak so high it touched the sky itself, while the Titans marshaled their forces on Mount Othrys. Between these 2 mountains, across the plains and valleys of the earth, the Titanomachy would rage for 10 full years. The war shook the foundations of creation. When Zeus hurled his lightning bolts, the sky itself screamed. When Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, the ground split open and seas rushed in to fill the wounds. When Hades unleashed the powers of death and darkness, armies faltered and fell. But the Titans were no less fearsome. Hyperion blazed with the fury of the sun, Crius commanded the powers of the cosmos, and Atlas, son of Iapetus, became the general of the Titan forces, leading them with strategic brilliance that nearly turned the tide of battle more than once. For a decade, the war raged on, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Mountains crumbled, seas boiled, and the sky ran red with the blood of immortals. The earth itself groaned under the weight of such conflict, and mortal creatures, only recently created, cowered in whatever shelter they could find, praying for the war to end. It was Gaia, the Earth Mother, who had set all these events in motion by encouraging Cronus to overthrow Uranus, who finally provided Zeus with the key to victory. She reminded him of the imprisoned Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, still locked away in Tartarus, where Cronus had thrust them after falsely promising to free them. These ancient children of Gaia, she told Zeus, could tip the balance if he would honor the promise his father had broken and grant them freedom. Zeus descended into Tartarus, that pit of suffering beneath even the deepest roots of the earth. He found the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires still imprisoned there, and he spoke to them of justice and freedom, of the new order he wished to establish, where beings would not be condemned simply because others feared their power. He broke their chains and led them back to the light they had barely seen since birth. In gratitude, the Cyclopes crafted weapons for the three brothers who had freed them. For Zeus, they forged the thunderbolt, a lance of pure lightning that could incinerate anything it struck. For Poseidon, they created the trident, a three-pronged spear that could command the seas and shake the earth. For Hades, they fashioned the helm of darkness, a helmet that rendered its wearer invisible and struck terror into the hearts of all who sensed its presence. Armed with these weapons and backed by the overwhelming might of the Hecatonchires, Zeus led his forces into one final decisive battle. The Hecatonchires, with their 100 arms each, could throw hundreds of boulders simultaneously, raining down stone like a catastrophic storm. The Titans, who had held their own against the Olympians for 10 years, found themselves suddenly overwhelmed. Atlas rallied his forces again and again, but there was no defense against such an onslaught. The final confrontation was apocalyptic. Zeus unleashed the full power of his thunderbolts, bolts of lightning so intense they ignited the very air. The earth burned, the seas boiled away to steam, and the sky itself seemed ready to shatter. Cronus and his fellow Titans fought with the desperation of those who knew they faced not merely defeat, but eternal imprisonment. The battle raged until Zeus, standing atop Olympus, raised his master bolt high and brought it crashing down with all his divine might. The explosion of power that followed marked the end of the Titan Age. One by one, the Titans fell. Most were cast down into Tartarus, chained in that same pit where they had imprisoned the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires. There they would remain for eternity, guarded by those 100-handed giants, forever removed from the light and power they once commanded. Cronus himself, the king who had swallowed his children, was chained in the deepest part of Tartarus, where his screams of rage and frustration could never reach the world above. Atlas received a special punishment for his role as general of the Titan forces. Zeus condemned him to stand at the western edge of the world, holding the entire sky upon his shoulders for all eternity. Every dawn, every sunset, every moment of every day, Atlas would bear that impossible weight, never able to rest, never able to set down his burden. It was a punishment that fit the magnitude of his opposition to the new order. With the Titans defeated and imprisoned, Zeus and his siblings gathered on Olympus to divide the cosmos among themselves. They drew lots to determine who would rule which domain. Zeus won the sky and became king of gods and mortals, wielder of the thunderbolt and sovereign of the heavens. Poseidon claimed the seas, all the waters of the world becoming his domain, making him second only to Zeus in power. Hades drew the underworld, the realm of the dead, a kingdom as vast and important as those of his brothers, though darker and lonelier. The earth itself was left neutral, belonging to no single god, but shared by all. The sisters too claimed their powers and domains. Hera became Zeus's queen and goddess of marriage and women. Demeter took dominion over agriculture and the harvest, the growing things that sustained mortal life. Hestia became goddess of the hearth, the sacred fire at the center of every home and temple. The age of the Olympians had begun. From their thrones on Mount Olympus, these 12 great gods would rule over gods, mortals, and the very forces of nature. They were not perfect. They were jealous and proud, passionate and petty, capable of both incredible kindness and terrible cruelty. But they were undeniably powerful, and their stories would shape the imagination of humanity for thousands of years to come. The Titanomachy was over, but the drama of the gods had only just begun. High above the clouds, where mortal eyes could never reach, Mount Olympus pierced the heavens like a spear thrust into the sky. At its summit, beyond the mists and storms that shrouded its lower slopes, lay the realm of the gods. Here, palaces of gold and marble gleamed in eternal sunlight. Gardens bloomed with flowers that never faded, and the immortals gathered to feast, debate, and shape the destiny of the world below. Zeus sat upon his throne, master of this divine assembly, king of gods and mortals alike. His very presence commanded respect even from his fellow Olympians. When he spoke, thunder rumbled in the distance. When he frowned, clouds gathered. When he smiled, the sun shone brighter, and the world seemed to breathe easier. The thunderbolt lay across his lap, a constant reminder of his power, and the aegis, a shield or breastplate decorated with the head of the Gorgon Medusa, protected his chest. Zeus was both magnificent and deeply flawed, embodying all the contradictions that would come to characterize the Greek gods. He was a god of justice, establishing laws and maintaining order among both deities and humans. He protected guests and punished those who violated the sacred bonds of hospitality. He upheld oaths and punished those who broke them. Suppliants could call upon Zeus for protection, and he would often answer their prayers. He was father, not just to gods, but to heroes, those exceptional mortals whose deeds would echo through the ages. Yet Zeus was also a god of appetites, particularly when it came to matters of desire. Despite his marriage to Hera, he pursued countless lovers, both divine and mortal. He would transform himself into almost anything to seduce the objects of his affection. A swan, a bull, a shower of gold, even another woman's husband. His list of conquests was staggering. From the mortal woman Danae, he fathered Perseus. From Alcmene came Heracles, greatest of all heroes. From the Titaness Leto, he sired Apollo and Artemis. From Metis, the oceanid of wisdom, he had Athena, though that birth was unusual in the extreme. When Metis was pregnant with Athena, a prophecy warned Zeus that she would bear 2 children. First, a daughter equal to him in wisdom, then a son who would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Cronus, and Cronus had overthrown Uranus. Determined to break this cycle, Zeus tricked Metis into transforming herself small, then swallowed her whole, child and all. He thought he had solved the problem, but Athena grew inside his head, fully formed and fully armed. Eventually, Zeus developed a splitting headache so severe that he commanded Hephaestus to strike his skull with an axe. When the smith god complied, Athena sprang forth from Zeus's head, giving her infamous war cry, dressed in golden armor and ready for battle. Thus, Athena had no mother in the traditional sense, being born directly from Zeus's divine intellect. Zeus's many affairs were legendary, and each one added to the rich mythology of Greece. He came to Europa disguised as a gentle white bull, carrying her across the sea to Crete. He approached Leda as a swan, seducing her and fathering both Helen of Troy and the Dioscuri twins. He visited Antiope as a satyr, Aegina as a flame, and Callisto by taking the form of Artemis herself. Sometimes his transformations protected the mortal women from Hera's wrath, but more often, they simply satisfied his own desires. Each union produced either gods, demigods, or heroes who would play crucial roles in the great myths yet to unfold. These affairs brought Zeus into constant conflict with his wife and sister Hera. As queen of the gods and goddess of marriage, Hera took her role seriously. She believed in the sanctity of marriage, the bonds that should hold husband and wife together in fidelity and respect. The irony of being married to the most unfaithful god in existence was not lost on her, and it fueled a rage that would last for eternity. Hera was formidable in her own right, even without considering her position as Zeus's wife. She was associated with the cow and the peacock, symbols of fertility and beauty. The cow represented her nurturing aspect, while the peacock's feathers, decorated with what looked like eyes, symbolized her watchfulness. Nothing escaped Hera's notice, especially her husband's indiscretions. She presided over all aspects of women's lives, particularly marriage and childbirth, and women prayed to her for safe deliveries and happy unions. But Hera's most famous characteristic was her jealousy, and she expressed it through elaborate and cruel punishments. She rarely directed her anger at Zeus himself. He was too powerful, and confronting him directly often ended badly for her. Instead, she targeted his lovers and their children, pursuing them with relentless vindictiveness. She transformed Callisto into a bear and would have had her hunted if Zeus hadn't placed her in the sky as the constellation Ursa Major. She drove Io across the world in the form of a cow tormented by a gadfly that gave her no peace. She attempted to prevent Leto from giving birth to Apollo and Artemis, forbidding any land under the sun to give her shelter. Hera's most sustained campaign of persecution was directed at Heracles, son of Zeus, and the mortal Alcmene. From the moment of his birth, Hera sought his destruction. She sent serpents to strangle him in his cradle, but the infant Heracles strangled them instead, displaying his divine strength. When he grew to manhood and married, Hera sent a madness upon him that caused him to kill his own wife and children. The famous 12 labors of Heracles were performed as penance for these murders, labors that Hera herself made as difficult as possible at every turn. Even after his death and ascension to Olympus, the tension between Heracles and Hera remained, though eventually they would reach a kind of reconciliation when he married her daughter Hebe, goddess of youth. Despite these conflicts, Hera was respected among the gods. Her temples were among the oldest and most important in Greece, particularly in Argos and Samos. She was a queen in every sense of the word, carrying herself with dignity and commanding respect from mortals and immortals alike. Her marriage to Zeus, for all its troubles, represented the ideal of queenship and the proper order of divine rule, even if the marriage itself was far from ideal. Zeus had 2 brothers who shared the rule of the cosmos with him, each commanding a realm as vast and important as the sky. Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, was second only to Zeus in power. When the 3 brothers divided the world, Poseidon might have felt he received the best domain. The seas covered more of the earth than the land, and their depths held mysteries even the gods rarely explored. With his iconic trident, forged by the Cyclopes during the Titanomachy, Poseidon could command the waves, raise storms that destroyed entire fleets, or calm the waters to glass-like smoothness. Poseidon's palace lay beneath the waves, a structure of gold and coral that rivaled Zeus's halls on Olympus in magnificence. From there, he ruled over all the creatures of the deep, from the smallest fish to the greatest sea monsters. He could be generous to those who honored him properly. Sailors made sacrifices to Poseidon before every voyage, praying for safe passage. But he could also be vengeful and destructive when offended. His temper was as changeable as the sea itself, calm one moment and raging the next. His power extended beyond the water. As the god of earthquakes, Poseidon was called the Earth Shaker. When he struck the ground with his trident, the earth would split open, swallowing buildings and people alike. This aspect made him particularly feared in earthquake-prone Greece, and many cities built temples to appease him. He was also the god of horses, having created the first horse from sea foam, or, in some versions, from striking a rock with his trident. The connection between horses and the sea god seemed strange to many, but the Greeks saw it clearly. Horses' power and spirit reminded them of waves crashing on the shore. Like his brother Zeus, Poseidon had a passionate nature that led to many affairs and many offspring. He married the Nereid Amphitrite, who became queen of the sea, but that didn't stop him from pursuing other lovers. From his union with the Gorgon Medusa, he fathered the winged horse Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor. He slept with numerous nymphs, mortals and goddesses, producing children who ranged from heroes to monsters. The Cyclops Polyphemus was his son, as was the hero Theseus, though Theseus's mortal father, King Aegeus of Athens, was also honored as his sire. Poseidon's conflicts with other gods often revolved around which cities would worship him. He competed with Athena for patronage of Athens in one of the most famous divine contests. Each god gave the city a gift. Poseidon struck his trident against the Acropolis and brought forth a spring of salt water, while Athena planted an olive tree. The Athenians chose Athena's gift, deeming it more useful, and she became their patron goddess. Poseidon's fury at this rejection was terrible, and he flooded the surrounding plain in punishment. He had similar conflicts with other gods over other cities, usually losing because his gifts, while impressive, were not always practical. The third brother, Hades, ruled a kingdom as vast as those of his brothers, but infinitely darker. The underworld was not merely a place of punishment, it was the destination of all souls, good and evil alike. When mortals died, their shades would descend into Hades' realm, crossing the river Styx in Charon's ferry, passing the 3-headed hound Cerberus who guarded the gates, and entering the land of the dead. Hades was perhaps the most misunderstood of the Olympians. While often depicted as evil in later interpretations, the ancient Greeks saw him differently. He was stern and unyielding, yes, but also just and honorable. He maintained order in his realm and treated the dead according to their merits. The virtuous went to the Elysian fields, a paradise within the underworld, where they lived in eternal happiness. The wicked suffered in Tartarus, enduring punishments tailored to their crimes. The ordinary majority dwelt in the fields of Asphodel, living a shadowy existence that was neither reward nor punishment, but simply a continuation of sorts. Hades rarely left his kingdom. Unlike Zeus and Poseidon, who frequently involved themselves in the affairs of mortals and gods, Hades preferred to remain in his dark realm. This isolation may have contributed to his reputation as grim and unapproachable. The ancient Greeks feared to speak his name, using euphemisms like the rich one or the hospitable one instead, hoping to avoid attracting his attention. Hades' most famous myth involved his abduction of Persephone, daughter of Demeter. Seeing the young goddess gathering flowers in a meadow, Hades fell deeply in love with her. With Zeus's permission, though without Demeter's, he burst through the earth in his dark chariot and carried Persephone screaming into the underworld. The aftermath of this abduction would have profound consequences for the mortal world, a story intimately connected with Demeter's domain. Demeter, goddess of agriculture and the harvest, was the fifth of Cronus and Rhea's children. Her domain was the earth's fertility, the growing grain, the ripening fruit, the cycles of planting and reaping that sustained mortal life. She taught humanity the arts of agriculture, showing them how to till the soil, plant seeds, and harvest crops. Without Demeter's blessing, the fields lay barren, and humanity would starve. When Hades took Persephone, Demeter's grief was all-consuming. She abandoned her duties and wandered the earth in mourning, searching for her lost daughter. Without her care, nothing grew. Crops withered in the fields. Trees bore no fruit, and the earth became a wasteland. Humanity began to starve, and their prayers to the gods went unanswered, for Demeter heard nothing but her own sorrow. Eventually, Demeter learned what had happened and confronted Zeus. The king of gods found himself in an impossible position. He had approved the marriage, but couldn't allow humanity to perish. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of each year with Hades in the underworld, and part with her mother above. But because Persephone had eaten pomegranate seeds while in the underworld, binding herself to that realm, she could never leave entirely. The ancient Greeks said this was why they had seasons. When Persephone descended to the underworld each autumn, Demeter mourned, and the world grew cold and barren. When she returned each spring, Demeter rejoiced, and the earth bloomed again. The final sibling, Hestia, was the goddess of the hearth and home. She was the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, the first to be swallowed and the last to be freed, making her both the eldest and the youngest of the Olympians. Hestia was unique among the gods in her lack of dramatic myths. She never married, remaining a virgin goddess, and she avoided the conflicts and intrigues that consumed so many of her fellow Olympians. But her importance should not be underestimated. The hearth was the center of ancient Greek life, the source of warmth, cooking fire, and communal gathering. Every home had a hearth sacred to Hestia, and every city maintained a public hearth in her honor. When colonists set out to found a new city, they carried fire from their home city's hearth to light the new one, maintaining the connection to their origins. When meals were served, the first and best portions were offered to Hestia. In some traditions, Hestia gave up her seat among the 12 Olympians to Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, to avoid conflict. This act was perfectly in keeping with her character, peaceful, modest, and focused on maintaining harmony. Though she may not have the exciting myths of her siblings, Hestia represented something fundamental to Greek society, the stability and sanctity of the home, the unchanging center around which all the dramatic events of life revolved. These 6 gods, children of the Titans, survivors of their father's madness, victors in the Great War, formed the core of the Olympian pantheon. But they were not alone on Olympus. Zeus's many affairs produced children who would join the divine assembly, each bringing their own domains, their own powers, their own personalities to the eternal drama playing out on the mountain's peak. The children of Zeus were many and varied, but some rose to prominence among the Olympians, claiming their places as major deities in their own right. Each brought unique gifts to the divine assembly, domains that touched every aspect of mortal and immortal existence. Their stories, their conflicts, and their interventions in mortal affairs would fill volumes, echoing through temples and theaters, sung by poets and inscribed on pottery, becoming as fundamental to Greek culture as the earth, sea, and sky their grandparents embodied. Athena, sprung from Zeus's head, fully formed and fully armed, was goddess of wisdom, warfare, handicrafts, and strategic thinking. Unlike Ares, who represented the chaotic fury of battle, Athena embodied war's intelligent aspects, the planning and strategy that determined victory. She was the defender of cities, the patron of heroes, and the inventor of countless useful tools and techniques. Her symbols were the owl, representing wisdom, and the olive tree, representing peace and prosperity. Athena's birth story set her apart from the other Olympians. Having no mother in the traditional sense, born directly from Zeus's head, from his very thoughts, she was his favorite child. He trusted her implicitly, allowing her to wield his thunderbolt and carry his aegis. Their relationship was closer than Zeus had with any of his other children, and Athena used her influence with her father wisely, becoming one of his most trusted advisors. Her role as protector of Athens, the city that bore her name, defined much of her mythology. The contest with Poseidon that won her this patronage was only the beginning. She became deeply involved in Athenian affairs, appearing at crucial moments to offer guidance, protect the city from threats, and bless its endeavors. The Parthenon, the greatest temple of the ancient world, was built in her honor, and her statue inside it, carved by Phidias, was considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. Athena assisted numerous heroes in their quests. She helped Perseus slay Medusa by giving him a polished shield to view the Gorgon's reflection, allowing him to avoid her petrifying gaze. She guided Heracles through his 12 labors, offering counsel and occasional direct intervention. She supported Odysseus throughout his trials, both during the Trojan War and on his long journey home, admiring his intelligence and cunning, qualities she valued above brute strength. As goddess of crafts, Athena taught mortals weaving, pottery, carpentry, and metalworking. She could be proud of her skills, however. When a mortal woman named Arachne claimed to be a better weaver than the goddess, Athena challenged her to a contest. Arachne wove a tapestry depicting the gods' misdeeds, particularly Zeus's affairs, with such skill that it matched Athena's own work. Enraged by the subject matter, and perhaps by being equaled by a mortal, Athena transformed Arachne into a spider, condemning her and her descendants to weave forever. Apollo, twin brother to Artemis, was perhaps the most beautiful and accomplished of the gods. God of music, poetry, prophecy, healing, plague, the sun, and truth. His domains were numerous and sometimes contradictory. He could cure disease with his healing arts or bring plague with his arrows. He represented enlightened aspects of civilization, art, philosophy, and knowledge. His oracle at Delphi was the most famous in Greece, where mortals sought divine guidance on everything from personal matters to affairs of state. Apollo's birth was fraught with difficulty. His mother, the Titaness Leto, was another of Zeus's lovers, and Hera, in her jealousy, pursued her relentlessly. She forbade any land under the sun to give Leto shelter for giving birth. Finally, the floating island of Delos, which was not fixed in place and thus not technically land under the sun, offered sanctuary. There, Leto gave birth first to Artemis, who then served as midwife when Apollo was born. The island became sacred to Apollo, and a great temple complex was built there in his honor. Apollo was associated with the lyre, which he played with unmatched skill. He led the Muses, the 9 goddesses of arts and sciences, in their performances on Olympus. The god was also a deadly archer, though his arrows were different from those of Artemis. Where she used hers for the hunt, Apollo's arrows brought plague to those who offended him. When the Greek warrior Agamemnon dishonored Apollo's priest at the beginning of the Iliad, the god sent a devastating plague upon the Greek army as punishment. The story of Apollo and Daphne illustrated both his power and his vulnerabilities. When Apollo mocked Eros, the god of love, for his archery skills, the offended Eros shot Apollo with a golden arrow that caused intense love, while shooting the nymph Daphne with a leaden arrow that caused intense aversion. Apollo pursued Daphne relentlessly, but she fled from him in terror. When he was about to catch her, she prayed to her father, the river god Peneus, who transformed her into a laurel tree. Apollo, devastated, decreed that the laurel would be his sacred tree, and he wore a laurel wreath ever after. Despite his many attributes, Apollo could be terribly cruel when his honor was slighted. When the satyr Marsyas challenged him to a musical contest, playing the aulos against Apollo's lyre, the god won and punished Marsyas's hubris by flaying him alive. When Niobe, queen of Thebes, boasted that her 14 children made her superior to Leto, who had only 2, Apollo and Artemis slew all of Niobe's children with their arrows, leaving her to weep for eternity, eventually transforming into a stone that perpetually wept water. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister, was goddess of the hunt, wild animals, wilderness, childbirth, and virginity. She was a paradox. A virgin goddess who presided over childbirth, a protector of young animals who was also the greatest huntress. She roamed the forests with her retinue of nymphs, all sworn to chastity, hunting with her silver bow and arrows that brought swift, painless death. Artemis fiercely guarded her virginity and that of her followers. When the hunter, Actaeon, accidentally stumbled upon her bathing, she transformed him into a stag. His own hunting dogs, not recognizing their master, tore him apart. When Zeus seduced one of Artemis's companions, the nymph Callisto, Artemis discovered the pregnancy and expelled her from the group. Some versions say Artemis herself transformed Callisto into a bear, while others credit Hera with that punishment. Despite her association with virginity, Artemis was called upon by women in childbirth. This apparent contradiction made sense to the Greeks. Artemis understood the wild, painful, dangerous aspects of nature, including the process of bringing new life into the world. Women prayed to her for safe deliveries, and she could grant them or withhold her aid as she chose. Her relationship with childbirth also connected her to her own mother's difficult labor. Artemis's relationship with Orion demonstrated the complexity of her character. Orion was a great hunter, and in some versions, Artemis fell in love with him, the only time she ever considered breaking her vow of chastity. Apollo, protective of his sister and perhaps jealous of her affection, tricked her into killing Orion. Pointing to a distant speck on the ocean, Apollo challenged Artemis to hit it with her arrow, knowing the target was actually Orion swimming far from shore. Artemis, never one to refuse a challenge, shot and killed her beloved. Grief-stricken, she placed Orion among the stars as a constellation where he hunts eternally across the night sky. Ares, god of war, was perhaps the least loved of the Olympians, even by his own parents. Where Athena represented strategic warfare, honorable combat, and justified conflict, Ares embodied war's brutal, savage aspects, bloodlust, violence, and chaos. He delighted in slaughter for its own sake, rushing into battle not for any noble cause, but simply for the joy of destruction. His companions were Phobos, fear, and Deimos, terror, his sons by Aphrodite, along with Eris, discord, who stirred up strife wherever she went. Despite being son of Zeus and Hera, Ares found little favor on Olympus. Homer's Iliad contains a scene where Ares is wounded in battle and flees to Olympus, complaining to Zeus about his injury. Zeus responds with contempt, telling Ares that of all the gods he is the most hateful, taking pleasure in war and strife. Even his mother Hera showed little affection for him. The Greeks themselves seemed to view Ares with ambivalence at best. While they respected war's necessity, they didn't glorify its bloodiest aspects as Ares did. His greatest humiliation came at the hands of 2 mortal giants, Otis and Ephialtes. These twin brothers captured Ares and imprisoned him in a bronze jar for 13 months. He would have remained there, growing progressively weaker, had not Hermes finally discovered and freed him. The fact that a god of war could be captured and imprisoned by mortals, even giant ones, speaks to his reputation for being more bluster than true power. Ares' most famous affair was with Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Despite her marriage to Hephaestus, the liaison between the god of war and goddess of love produced several children, including Eros, in some traditions, Phobos, Deimos, and Harmonia, whose very name, meaning harmony, suggested the potential balance between love and strife. Their affair was discovered when Helios, the sun god who saw everything, informed Hephaestus of his wife's infidelity. The smith god crafted an invisible net and placed it over his bed, then pretended to leave. When Ares and Aphrodite lay together, the net captured them, and Hephaestus invited all the gods to witness his wife's shame. The gods laughed at the trapped lovers, but Poseidon eventually persuaded Hephaestus to release them. Aphrodite was born from Uranus's severed genitals falling into the sea, making her older than the Olympians, though she was counted among them. She was the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation, and her power extended over gods and mortals alike. No one was immune to her influence. She could make anyone fall in love, and she delighted in using this power, sometimes benevolently, sometimes cruelly. Aphrodite's marriage to Hephaestus was arranged by Zeus, perhaps as compensation for the smith god's physical disability. Hephaestus was not what anyone would call handsome, being lame and covered in soot from his forge, making him an odd match for the most beautiful goddess. Unsurprisingly, Aphrodite sought affection elsewhere, most notably with Ares, but also with the beautiful mortal Adonis, whose death she mourned deeply, and with Hermes, with whom she conceived Hermaphroditus. The goddess played a crucial role in starting the Trojan War. When the goddess Eris wasn't invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, she threw a golden apple inscribed "to the fairest" among the divine guests. 3 goddesses claimed it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Zeus wisely refused to judge and instead appointed Paris, a Trojan prince, as arbiter. Each goddess offered Paris a bribe. Hera offered power, Athena offered wisdom and victory in war, and Aphrodite offered the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite, and she gave him Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. This choice led directly to the Trojan War, demonstrating how the whims of the gods could reshape the mortal world. Hephaestus, the ugly god married to beauty itself, was master of the forge and god of fire, metalworking, craftsmanship, and sculpture. Despite his physical deformity, he created the most beautiful and powerful objects in existence. He forged Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, Athena's aegis, Apollo's golden chariot, and Artemis's silver bow. He created the first woman, Pandora, at Zeus's command. He built the palaces of the gods and fashioned gifts and weapons that mortals could only dream of possessing. His lameness had 2 origin stories. In one version, he was born deformed, and Hera, disgusted by his appearance, threw him from Olympus. He fell for a day before landing in the ocean, where the sea nymphs Thetis and Eurynome rescued him and raised him in an underwater grotto. There, he learned his craft, creating beautiful jewelry for his foster mothers. In the other version, Hephaestus was born perfect, but became lame when Zeus threw him from Olympus for taking Hera's side in an argument. Whichever version was true, his relationship with his parents was complicated, particularly with his mother. Despite his humiliation regarding Aphrodite's affair, or perhaps because of it, Hephaestus was generally portrayed as good-natured and hard-working. He spent most of his time in his forge, creating and inventing, occasionally emerging to Olympus for meetings or celebrations. His workshop was sometimes placed on Olympus itself, sometimes under volcanoes like Mount Etna in Sicily, where the Cyclopes assisted him. The smoke and fire from volcanic eruptions were said to be Hephaestus at work. Hermes, son of Zeus and the nymph Maia, was perhaps the most versatile of the Olympians. As messenger of the gods, he traveled between Olympus, Earth, and the underworld with equal ease. He was god of travelers, merchants, thieves, athletes, and boundaries. He guided souls to the afterlife, gave mortals dreams, and served as herald for Zeus. He was clever, quick-witted, and mischievous, traits he displayed from his very first day of life. According to myth, Hermes was born at dawn, and by noon had already committed his first theft. He crept from his cradle, found a tortoise, killed it, and used its shell to create the first lyre, inventing music in the process. Then, still on his first day of life, he stole 50 cattle belonging to Apollo, cleverly making them walk backward so their tracks led in the wrong direction. Apollo eventually discovered the theft, but when Hermes played the lyre he had invented, the music so enchanted Apollo that he agreed to trade his cattle for the instrument. The two became close friends, and Zeus appointed Hermes as his herald. Hermes wore winged sandals that allowed him to fly, carried a herald's staff called the caduceus, and often wore a winged cap. His speed made him invaluable as a messenger, able to traverse the realms in moments. But Hermes was more than just a courier. He was patron of thieves and merchants, two professions the Greeks saw as related, both involving cunning, negotiation, and sometimes deception. He protected travelers at crossroads and boundaries, liminal spaces that were considered dangerous and sacred. He escorted souls to the underworld, earning the title Psychopomp, Guide of Souls. Hermes' cleverness made him the perfect helper for heroes. He gave Perseus the winged sandals and Hades' helm of darkness to help him slay Medusa. He guided Priam safely through the Greek camp to ransom Hector's body from Achilles. He warned Odysseus about Circe's magic and gave him the herb moly to protect him from her spells. Time and again, Hermes appeared at crucial moments, offering the gift of divine intervention wrapped in mortal ingenuity. The final Olympian was Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, theater, and religious frenzy. He was the youngest of the Olympians, and his inclusion among the 12 was unusual. Born of Zeus and the mortal woman Semele, Dionysus was the only Olympian with a mortal parent. His birth story was dramatic. Hera, jealous as always, tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his true form. When he did, his divine radiance incinerated the pregnant mortal. Zeus saved the unborn Dionysus by sewing him into his own thigh, and months later, the god was born a second time from his father's body. Dionysus was raised in secret to protect him from Hera's wrath. He grew up far from Olympus, learning the cultivation of grapes and the creation of wine. When he reached maturity, he wandered the world teaching mortals viticulture and establishing his cult. His followers, called Maenads or Bacchantes, were primarily women who participated in ecstatic rituals that sometimes turned violent. These ceremonies involved dancing, music, intoxication, and a temporary escape from social constraints, appealing particularly to those who felt oppressed by ordinary social structures. The god's arrival in a city was often met with resistance. Many kings saw the Dionysian cult as a threat to social order, and they tried to suppress it. This always ended badly for them. King Pentheus of Thebes forbade Dionysian worship, so the god drove the women of Thebes, including Pentheus's own mother, into a frenzy. They tore the king apart with their bare hands, his mother carrying his head on her thyrsus, believing it was a lion's head, until the madness lifted. King Lycurgus attacked Dionysus and his followers, so the god punished him with madness that led him to kill his own son, mistaking him for a grapevine. Despite his association with wine and revelry, Dionysus was not merely a god of drunkenness and parties. He represented the breaking down of boundaries, the loosening of inhibitions, the temporary madness that could free people from their everyday constraints. His theater festivals, particularly the Great Dionysia in Athens, were major religious events where playwrights presented tragedies and comedies. Theater itself was sacred to Dionysus, a space where masks allowed actors to become other people, where stories explored the depths of human experience. These 12 Olympians, each powerful in their own domain, each with their own personalities, desires, and conflicts, ruled from Mount Olympus over gods and mortals alike. Their stories were not simple moral tales, but complex narratives reflecting the full spectrum of human experience: love and jealousy, justice and vengeance, wisdom and folly, creation and destruction. They were immortal and powerful, yet they displayed very human emotions and made very human mistakes. This combination of divinity and humanity made them eternally fascinating to the ancient Greeks and continues to captivate us today. The gods, for all their power, were distant beings who dwelt on unreachable mountaintops or in the depths of the sea. But there were others who walked the earth, beings who bridged the gap between divine and mortal. These were the heroes, exceptional individuals, often born from unions between gods and humans, who performed deeds that transcended normal human capability. Their stories inspired courage, taught lessons, and gave mortals hope that greatness was achievable, that even in the face of impossible odds, determination and virtue could triumph. Among all these legendary figures, one stood tallest, his strength unmatched, his deeds most famous. Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules, was the greatest hero Greece ever produced. He was son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, born in Thebes under circumstances that immediately marked him for an extraordinary life. Zeus had come to Alcmene disguised as her husband Amphitryon, while the real Amphitryon was away at war. When Amphitryon returned the same night, Alcmene conceived a second son, Iphicles, making Heracles and Iphicles twin brothers with different fathers, one divine, one mortal. Hera's hatred of Heracles began even before his birth. She learned of Zeus's affair and of the prophecy that this child would become the greatest hero, so she set out to destroy him. When the time came for Heracles to be born, Hera delayed his birth through her daughter Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, while causing the premature birth of Eurystheus, Heracles' cousin. This manipulation meant that Eurystheus, rather than Heracles, became king of Mycenae, the position Zeus had intended for his son. Hera's persecution continued throughout Heracles' life. When he was just 8 months old, she sent 2 enormous serpents to his cradle to strangle him. The infant Heracles grabbed the snakes, one in each hand, and squeezed until they died, displaying the supernatural strength that would define his life. His parents found him the next morning, playing with the dead serpents as if they were toys. Already a hero before he could walk, Heracles grew into a man of enormous physical strength and size, towering over other mortals. He received the finest education. Chiron, the centaur, taught him hunting and survival. Castor taught him armed combat. Amphitryon taught him to drive chariots. But his education was not without its dark moments. His music teacher, Linos, struck him in frustration at his slow progress, and Heracles killed him with a single blow of his lyre, not yet understanding his own strength. As a young man, Heracles married Megara, princess of Thebes, and they had several children together. He seemed destined for a life of honor and happiness. But Hera would not allow it. She sent a terrible madness upon him, clouding his mind until he could not recognize his own family. In his insanity, Heracles killed his wife and children, believing them to be his enemies. When the madness lifted and he saw what he had done, his grief and horror were absolute. Desperate for atonement, Heracles consulted the oracle at Delphi. The Pythia told him he must serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae for 12 years, performing whatever labors the king commanded. If he completed these tasks successfully, he would be purified of his crime and granted immortality. Heracles, though of noble birth and divine blood, thus became a servant to a lesser man, all because of Hera's manipulation years before. Eurystheus, knowing of Heracles' strength and fearing him, devised 12 tasks, each seemingly impossible, each designed to kill the hero. These became known as the 12 labors of Heracles, feats that would cement his reputation for all time. The first labor sent Heracles to Nemea to kill a lion that had been terrorizing the region. This was no ordinary lion, but a beast with a hide so tough that no weapon could pierce it. Heracles discovered this when his arrows bounced harmlessly off the creature. He tried his sword and his club, but nothing worked. Finally, he chased the lion into its cave, which had 2 entrances. Heracles blocked one entrance with boulders, entered through the other, and cornered the beast. He wrestled the Nemean lion with his bare hands, eventually strangling it to death. Afterward, he skinned it using the lion's own claws, the only thing sharp enough to cut its hide, and wore the pelt as armor. From that day forward, Heracles was never depicted without the Nemean lion skin draped over his shoulders. The second labor took him to Lake Lerna, where the Hydra lived. This serpent had 9 heads, and for every head Heracles cut off, 2 more grew in its place. Heracles couldn't win through strength alone. He needed strategy. His nephew Iolaus accompanied him, and together they devised a plan. Each time Heracles severed a head, Iolaus immediately cauterized the neck with a burning torch, preventing new heads from growing. One head, the central one, was immortal and could not be killed, so Heracles buried it under a huge rock. He then dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood, making them deadly weapons for future battles. His third labor required him to capture the Ceryneian hind, a deer sacred to Artemis with golden horns and bronze hooves. Unlike the previous two labors, he couldn't kill this creature, for it was under Artemis's protection. For a full year, Heracles pursued the hind through forests and mountains, never giving up, until finally he caught it by the river Ladon and carried it back to Eurystheus. When Artemis confronted him for capturing her sacred animal, Heracles explained his situation and blamed Eurystheus, and the goddess allowed him to complete the labor. The fourth labor sent him after the Erymanthian boar, a massive creature that had been ravaging Mount Erymanthus. Heracles chased the boar into deep snow, where it became exhausted, then captured it alive in a net. He carried the struggling creature back to Mycenae on his shoulders. When Eurystheus saw Heracles approaching with the boar, the cowardly king hid in a large bronze jar, shouting his commands from within. For his fifth labor, Heracles faced a different challenge entirely. He had to clean the Augean stables in a single day. King Augeas owned vast herds of cattle, and their stables had not been cleaned in 30 years. The amount of filth was staggering, piled so high that the task seemed impossible. But Heracles, using his intelligence rather than just his strength, diverted two rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, through the stables. The rushing waters swept away all the filth in one day. Eurystheus later tried to invalidate this labor, claiming Heracles had received payment from Augeas, but the labor was eventually accepted. The sixth labor involved the Stymphalian birds, man-eating birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers they could launch like arrows. They had taken over a marsh near Stymphalos, terrorizing the region. Athena gave Heracles a pair of bronze castanets made by Hephaestus. The noise from these castanets startled the birds into flight, and Heracles shot them down with his arrows dipped in hydra venom. His seventh labor brought him to Crete to capture the Bull of Crete, the same bull that Poseidon had sent to King Minos and that had sired the Minotaur. The bull had gone mad and was rampaging across the island. Heracles wrestled it into submission and brought it back to Eurystheus, who released it. The bull wandered to Marathon, where it would later be killed by another hero, Theseus. The eighth labor required him to steal the mares of Diomedes, 4 horses belonging to the king of Thrace. These were not normal horses, but man-eating mares, fed on human flesh and wild with bloodlust. Heracles defeated Diomedes in battle, and in some versions fed the king to his own mares, which calmed them. He then brought them back to Eurystheus, who released them. According to legend, their descendants lived to the time of Alexander the Great. For the ninth labor, Heracles traveled to the land of the Amazons to obtain the belt of Hippolyta, the Amazon queen. The belt, a gift from her father Ares, symbolized her authority. When Heracles arrived, Hippolyta actually agreed to give him the belt peacefully, impressed by his reputation. But Hera, disguised as an Amazon, spread rumors that Heracles intended to kidnap the queen. The Amazons attacked, and in the confusion, Heracles killed Hippolyta and took the belt. Thinking she had betrayed him, the 10th labor sent him to the far west, to the island of Erythea, to steal the cattle of Geryon. Geryon was a monster with 3 bodies joined at the waist, making him incredibly difficult to fight. Heracles traveled to the ends of the known world, setting up the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar, along the way. He killed Geryon with a single arrow that pierced all 3 bodies at once, then drove the cattle back to Greece, a journey that took him across all of Western Europe. His 11th labor took him even further, to the Garden of the Hesperides, where golden apples grew on a tree, guarded by a dragon named Ladon, and tended by nymphs. Some versions have Heracles killing the dragon himself, while others have him recruiting Atlas, who held up the sky, to fetch the apples. In this version, Heracles temporarily took Atlas's burden, holding the heavens on his shoulders. When Atlas returned with the apples, he didn't want to take the burden back, but Heracles tricked him by asking him to hold it for just a moment while he adjusted his cloak, then left with the apples. The 12th and final labor was the most dangerous of all, to descend into the underworld and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound that guarded Hades' gates. This task required Heracles to face death itself. Guided by Hermes, he descended into the realm of the dead. There he met Hades and respectfully asked permission to borrow Cerberus. Hades agreed on one condition: Heracles must overpower the hound using only his strength, no weapons. Heracles grappled with the three-headed monster, choking it until it submitted, then carried it to the surface. When Eurystheus saw Cerberus, he was so terrified that he released Heracles from his service immediately and begged him to return the creature to the underworld. With the 12 labors complete, Heracles was free. He had been purified of his crime and earned his immortality, but his adventures did not end there. He participated in many other quests and battles, sailed with Jason and the Argonauts, helped the gods defeat the giants when they attacked Olympus, and performed countless other deeds. His eventual death came not in battle, but through trickery and poison. But even in death, he achieved his final reward, ascending to Olympus to live among the gods, where he married Hebe, goddess of youth, and was finally, after a lifetime of persecution, reconciled with Hera. While Heracles overshadowed all other heroes in fame and achievement, Greece produced many other legendary champions, each with their own remarkable stories. Their quests and adventures filled the mythological landscape, giving mortals examples to aspire to and tales to tell around fires on dark nights. Perseus, another son of Zeus, began his life in unusual circumstances. His grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos, received a prophecy that his daughter Danae would bear a son who would kill him. To prevent this, Acrisius imprisoned Danae in a bronze chamber underground, where no man could reach her. But Zeus came to her as a shower of golden light, and from this union, Perseus was conceived. When Acrisius discovered his daughter had given birth, he couldn't bring himself to kill them directly, fearing divine retribution. Instead, he sealed Danae and infant Perseus in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, leaving their fate to the gods. The chest floated to the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys found them and took them in. Perseus grew up on this island, becoming a strong and capable young man, unaware of his royal heritage. The king of Seriphos, Polydectes, desired Danae, but was thwarted by Perseus's protection of his mother. To be rid of the young hero, Polydectes held a banquet and required all guests to bring gifts of horses. Perseus, being poor, had nothing to offer. Rashly, he promised to bring any gift the king desired. Polydectes, seeing his opportunity, demanded the head of Medusa, one of the 3 Gorgons, creatures so hideous that anyone who looked directly at them turned to stone. This task seemed like a death sentence, but Perseus had divine favor. Athena, who had her own grudge against Medusa, appeared to him with guidance. Hermes also came to his aid. They told him he would need special equipment: Hades' helm of darkness to make him invisible, winged sandals to allow him to fly, a special wallet to carry the head, and a polished shield to view Medusa's reflection. To obtain these items, Perseus first had to find the Grey, 3 ancient sisters who shared a single eye and tooth between them. Perseus stole the eye while they were passing it between them, refusing to return it until they told him where to find the nymphs who guarded the special equipment. The Grey, having no choice, revealed the location. Perseus obtained the equipment and set off for the Gorgon's lair. Medusa and her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, lived on a remote island littered with the stone statues of warriors who had tried to kill them. The other 2 Gorgons were immortal, but Medusa was mortal, making her the target. Using Athena's polished shield as a mirror, Perseus could see Medusa's reflection without looking directly at her. He waited until she slept, then, guided by the reflection, struck off her head with a curved sword. From Medusa's neck sprang 2 offspring, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a giant wielding a golden sword, both fathered by Poseidon before Medusa's transformation. As Perseus fled with the head in his special wallet, the other Gorgons awakened and pursued him, but he used Hades' helm to become invisible and escaped. On his journey home, he passed over Ethiopia and saw a beautiful woman chained to a rock by the sea. This was Andromeda, daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia had boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than the Nereids, sea nymphs, and Poseidon had sent a sea monster to punish this hubris. The oracle said only sacrificing Andromeda to the monster would save the kingdom. Perseus fell in love with Andromeda at first sight. He made a deal with her parents. He would save her if they agreed to let him marry her. When the sea monster appeared, Perseus pulled out Medusa's head and turned the creature to stone. He freed Andromeda, and they were married. However, Andromeda had been previously promised to her uncle Phineus, who arrived with armed men to claim her. Perseus used Medusa's head again, turning Phineus and his men to stone. Returning to Seriphos, Perseus found that Polydectes had been harassing his mother, trying to force her to marry him. Perseus confronted the king at a banquet, and when Polydectes scoffed at the idea that he had truly completed his quest, revealed Medusa's head, turning Polydectes and his supporters to stone. Perseus then returned the magical equipment to the gods and gave Medusa's head to Athena, who placed it on her aegis. The prophecy about Acrisius came true eventually, though not in the way anyone expected. Perseus, traveling to Larissa to participate in funeral games, threw a discus that went awry and struck a spectator who happened to be Acrisius, his grandfather who had been hiding there. The old king died from the blow, fulfilling the prophecy he had tried so hard to avoid. Theseus, hero of Athens, was another great champion who combined strength with cleverness. Like Perseus, his father was a king, though in this case a mortal one. Aegeus, king of Athens, visited King Pythias of Troezen and, after a night of drinking, slept with Pythias's daughter Aethra. Before leaving, Aegeus placed his sword and sandals under a large rock, telling Aethra that when their son was strong enough to lift the rock and retrieve these tokens, he should come to Athens to claim his birthright. Theseus grew strong in Troezen, raised by his mother and grandfather. When he came of age and lifted the rock with ease, Aethra told him of his father. Most people would have traveled to Athens by the safe sea route, but Theseus chose the dangerous land route specifically because it was dangerous. He wanted to prove himself by facing the bandits and monsters that plagued the road, consciously modeling himself after his hero, Heracles. Along the way, Theseus defeated several notorious villains. He killed Periphetes, who crushed travelers with an iron club and took the club for himself. He encountered Sinis, who would bend 2 pine trees to the ground, tie travelers between them, then release the trees, tearing his victims apart. Theseus killed him using his own method. He fought the Crommyonian sow, a monstrous wild pig. He threw Siren, who kicked travelers off a cliff to feed to a giant turtle off his own cliff. He killed Circeon, who forced travelers to wrestle him to the death. Finally, he dealt with Procrustes, who forced travelers to lie on his bed, stretching short people and cutting tall people to make them fit. Theseus gave each villain a taste of their own medicine, establishing himself as a hero before even reaching Athens. When Theseus arrived in Athens, Aegeus didn't recognize him. The king's wife, Medea, the same sorceress who had helped Jason, saw through Theseus immediately and, fearing he would supplant her own son, tried to poison him. Aegeus knocked the poisoned cup from Theseus's hand just in time, recognizing his sword and sandals. He embraced his son and declared him heir to the throne. Medea fled with her son. Theseus's greatest achievement came shortly after. Athens was forced to send a tribute to King Minos of Crete every 9 years, 7 young men and 7 young women to be fed to the Minotaur, a monster that was half man, half bull, imprisoned in an enormous labyrinth beneath Minos' palace. Theseus volunteered to be one of the 7 youths, intending to kill the Minotaur and end the tribute. In Crete, Minos' daughter Ariadne fell in love with Theseus. She gave him a ball of thread, instructing him to tie one end at the entrance to the labyrinth and unwind it as he went, so he could find his way back. Theseus entered the labyrinth, found the Minotaur at its center, and killed it with his bare hands, or in some versions, with a sword Ariadne had given him. He followed the thread back to the entrance, where Ariadne and the other Athenians waited. They escaped on Theseus's ship, with Ariadne aboard. The voyage home had a tragic ending for Ariadne. Theseus abandoned her on the island of Naxos, either because Athena ordered him to in a dream, or because he simply didn't love her and was only using her. She awoke to find herself alone, eventually becoming the bride of Dionysus, who found her weeping on the shore. As for Theseus, He forgot to change his ship's sails from black to white, as he had promised his father he would do if he survived. Aegeus, watching from a cliff, saw the black sails and, believing his son dead, threw himself into the sea. That sea has been called the Aegean ever since. Theseus became king of Athens and was credited with uniting the separate villages of Attica into a single city-state. He was a wise and popular ruler, though his personal life remained troubled. His friendship with the Centaurs led to the famous battle between the Lapiths and Centaurs at Pirithous' wedding. His abduction of the young Helen, who would later become Helen of Troy, before she was of age, prompted her brothers, the Dioscuri, to rescue her. His attempt to help Pirithous abduct Persephone from the underworld resulted in both of them being trapped in the chairs of forgetfulness in Hades' realm. Heracles eventually rescued Theseus, but Pirithous remained. Jason, leader of the Argonauts, undertook a quest that would become as famous as the 12 labors of Heracles. Jason's uncle Peleus had usurped the throne of Iolcus from Jason's father, Aeson. To reclaim his birthright, Jason would need to prove himself worthy. Peleus, hoping to be rid of his nephew permanently, sent him on what seemed like an impossible quest to retrieve the Golden Fleece from Colchis at the far end of the known world. The Golden Fleece came from a winged ram that had rescued 2 children, Phrixus and Hel, from sacrifice. Hel fell from the ram's back and drowned in the strait that became the Hellespont, but Phrixus reached Colchis safely. He sacrificed the ram to Zeus and gave its golden fleece to King Aias, who hung it in a sacred grove guarded by a sleepless dragon. Jason assembled the greatest heroes of the age for this quest. These Argonauts, named after their ship the Argo, included Heracles, Theseus, Orpheus, the legendary musician, Castor and Pollux, the divine twins, Atalanta, the huntress, and many others. Together, they sailed through numerous adventures, navigating the clashing rocks that crushed ships between them, visiting the island of Lemnos where only women lived, and encountering countless other perils. When they finally reached Colchis, King Aeetes agreed to give Jason the fleece if he could complete certain tasks, yoking 2 fire-breathing bulls with bronze hooves to plow a field, sowing the field with dragon's teeth, and defeating the warriors that would spring from those teeth. These tasks were designed to be impossible, but Jason had an unexpected ally. Aeetes' daughter, Medea, a powerful sorceress, fell in love with Jason. Some say Hera made this happen to help Jason. Medea gave him magical ointment to protect him from the bull's flames and told him how to defeat the warriors, throw a rock among them, and they would fight each other instead of him. Jason completed the tasks, but Aeetes still refused to surrender the fleece. Medea helped again, using her magic to put the dragon to sleep so Jason could steal the fleece. They fled Colchis with the Argonauts, pursued by Aias' fleet. To delay her father, Medea committed a horrific act. She killed her brother Apsyrtus and scattered pieces of his body in the sea, forcing Aeetes to stop and gather them for proper burial. The journey home was as perilous as the journey there, with many more adventures before the Argonauts finally returned to Elchis. Jason gave the fleece to Peleus, but the king still refused to surrender the throne. Medea tricked Peleus' daughters into killing their father by demonstrating how she could restore youth to an old ram by cutting it up and boiling it with magical herbs. The daughters tried the same with their father, but without Medea's magic, they simply murdered him. Jason and Medea had to flee, eventually settling in Corinth. For a time, they lived peacefully, having children together, but Jason's ambition eventually led him to betray Medea. King Creon of Corinth offered Jason his daughter Glauce in marriage, a union that would make Jason a prince. Jason agreed, abandoning Medea. The sorceress's revenge was terrible. She sent Glauce a poisoned dress that burned her alive, killed Creon when he tried to save his daughter, and murdered her own children by Jason. Then she escaped in a chariot pulled by dragons, leaving Jason alone with his grief. According to legend, Jason died when a piece of the decaying Argo fell on him while he slept beneath it, a fitting end for a hero whose glory had turned to tragedy. These heroes and many others like them walked the earth in the age of myths, bridging the gap between gods and mortals, proving that greatness was possible even for those born to die. Their stories taught courage, cunning, and the importance of honoring the gods, while also showing the tragic consequences of hubris and betrayal. They were not perfect, but they were extraordinary, and their legends would inspire humanity for thousands of years. All the myths, all the heroes, all the divine interventions seemed to converge in one great conflict that would define an age. The Trojan War lasted 10 years, involving every major hero of the generation and drawing the gods themselves into bitter partisan conflict. It began with a wedding and would end with the complete destruction of one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. The goddess Eris, Discord, was not invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. In her anger at this slight, she arrived anyway and threw a golden apple into the celebration. Upon it was inscribed, "To the fairest." 3 goddesses immediately claimed it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Zeus, wisely refusing to judge between his wife, daughter, and the goddess of love, appointed a mortal to make the decision. Paris, a prince of Troy, who was living as a shepherd on Mount Ida, unaware of his true identity. Each goddess offered Paris a bribe. Hera promised him power and dominion over all of Europe and Asia. Athena offered wisdom, skill in warfare, and victory in every battle. Aphrodite offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, perhaps driven by youth and desire, perhaps already doomed by fate, chose Aphrodite. The goddess of love gave him Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Helen was already a figure of legend, so beautiful that she had been abducted as a child by Theseus. She had suitors from across Greece when she came of age. Her father, fearing the rejected suitors would cause trouble, made them all swear an oath. They would respect Helen's choice of husband and come to his aid if anyone ever tried to steal her. Helen chose Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece. When Paris visited Sparta on a diplomatic mission, Aphrodite fulfilled her promise. Paris and Helen fell in love. Or perhaps Paris simply took her, while Aphrodite clouded the minds of those who might have stopped them. They fled to Troy, taking much of Menelaus' treasure with them. Menelaus was devastated and called upon all Helen's former suitors to honor their oath and help him retrieve his wife. The Greek forces assembled at Aulis. Led by Menelaus' brother Agamemnon, they gathered the greatest heroes: Achilles, son of Peleus, and the sea nymph Thetis, fastest and most deadly of all warriors; Ajax the Greater, huge and unstoppable in battle; Odysseus, king of Ithaca, clever and resourceful; Diomedes, fierce and favored by Athena; Nestor, oldest and wisest of the Greek commanders, and many others. Over 1,000 ships sailed for Troy, the largest military expedition ever assembled in Greek legend. The gods took sides immediately. Hera and Athena, still bitter about losing the beauty contest and angry at Paris for his choice, supported the Greeks. Aphrodite naturally defended Troy and Paris. Apollo and Artemis favored the Trojans, as did Ares, though his support was less about justice and more about his love of war. Poseidon generally helped the Greeks, though he had his own complicated history with Troy. Zeus tried to remain neutral, but was constantly manipulated by the other gods, particularly Hera, who used every trick she could devise to turn his favor toward the Greeks. The war's first 9 years passed largely unrecorded in Homer's Iliad, though other sources mention various events. The Greeks besieged Troy, but could not breach its massive walls. The Trojans had many allies from across Asia Minor who came to their defense. Heroes fought and died on both sides, but neither could gain a decisive advantage. Then, in the 10th year, the events chronicled in the Iliad began with a conflict that would nearly destroy the Greek forces from within. Agamemnon, in a raid on a nearby town, captured a young woman named Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo. When her father offered ransom for her return, Agamemnon refused with contempt. The priest prayed to Apollo, and the god sent a devastating plague upon the Greek camp. After 9 days of watching his men die, Achilles called an assembly and demanded that Agamemnon release Chryseis to stop the plague. Agamemnon agreed but insisted on compensation. He took Briseis, a captive woman who had been awarded to Achilles as a prize of honor. This public humiliation infuriated Achilles, not just because he cared for Briseis, but because it insulted his honor, the most precious possession a Greek hero had. Achilles withdrew from the fighting, taking his myrmidons with him, and prayed to his mother Thetis to convince Zeus to let the Trojans prevail until the Greeks understood how much they needed him. Zeus, who owed Thetis a favor, agreed. The Trojans, led by Hector, began to dominate the battlefield. Hector was Paris's older brother, the greatest Trojan warrior, a man who fought not from ambition or bloodlust, but from duty to defend his city and his family. He was noble, brave, and respected even by his enemies. Under his leadership, the Trojans pushed the Greeks back to their ships and nearly burned their fleet. The Greeks begged Achilles to return, offering him magnificent gifts, but he refused. His pride was too wounded. However, when his closest friend, Patroclus, saw the Greeks being slaughtered, he begged Achilles to at least let him wear Achilles' distinctive armor and led the Myrmidons into battle. Achilles agreed, hoping that the Trojans would mistake Patroclus for him and retreat. The plan worked at first. The Trojans, seeing what they thought was Achilles, fell back in fear. But Patroclus, caught up in battle fury, pursued them too far, ignoring Achilles' warnings. He fought his way to the walls of Troy itself, where Apollo struck him, dazing him. In his confusion, he was wounded by Euphorbus, then finished by Hector, who stripped Achilles' armor from Patroclus' body. When Achilles learned of his friend's death, his grief was terrible to behold. He wailed so loudly that his mother heard him from her home in the sea and came to comfort him. She knew what his return to battle would mean. Achilles had a choice between two fates. He could live a long, peaceful life without glory, or he could die young in battle but be remembered forever. Patroclus' death made his choice for him. He would return to battle and kill Hector, no matter the cost. Thetis went to Hephaestus and asked him to forge new armor for her son, since Hector now wore the old set. The smith god created the most magnificent armor ever made, including the famous Shield of Achilles, decorated with images of the entire cosmos, earth and sky, cities at peace and war, the seasons, and all of human life. When Achilles donned this armor, he looked like a god. The confrontation between Achilles and Hector was inevitable. Achilles chased the Trojan champion 3 times around the walls of Troy before they finally faced each other in single combat. Hector fought bravely, but he was no match for Achilles' superhuman skill and fury. Achilles' spear pierced Hector's throat, though not so deep as to prevent him from speaking his final words, prophesying that Paris and Apollo would soon kill Achilles at Troy's Scaean gate. But Achilles' grief and rage were not satisfied by simply killing Hector. He tied Hector's corpse to his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy, then back to the Greek camp, where he dragged it around Patroclus' funeral pyre 3 times. For days, he continued to desecrate the body, while the gods protected it from decay and damage. This behavior went too far, even for the Greeks, who valued honor even to enemies. Finally, Zeus sent Thetis to Achilles, commanding him to accept ransom for Hector's body. That same night, King Priam, Hector's father, came alone through the Greek camp under Hermes' protection. The old king knelt before Achilles and kissed the hands that had killed his son, begging for his body so it could receive proper funeral rites. In that moment, Achilles saw his own father in Priam and was moved to pity. He agreed, granting Priam a 12-day truce for Hector's funeral. The Iliad ends with Hector's funeral, but the war continued. Achilles, as Hector had prophesied, was killed by Paris, guided by Apollo. The arrow struck his heel, the only vulnerable part of his body. According to legend, Thetis had tried to make him invulnerable by dipping him in the river Styx, but she held him by the heel, which remained unprotected. The phrase, Achilles' heel, comes from this myth. The Greeks eventually won through cunning, rather than valor. Odysseus devised the stratagem of the Trojan horse, a giant wooden horse presented as a gift to Athena, left outside Troy's walls while the Greek fleet appeared to sail away. The Trojans, believing the war was over, brought the horse inside their city walls despite warnings from the priestess Cassandra, cursed never to be believed, and the priest Laocoon. That night, Greek warriors hidden inside the horse emerged and opened the city gates for their army, which had secretly returned. Troy fell in fire and blood. Priam was killed. Hector's infant son Astyanax was thrown from the walls, and most of the Trojan men were slaughtered. The women were taken as slaves, and the great city that had stood for generations was razed to the ground. The war was over, but its consequences would echo for years. Many Greek heroes would find their homecomings far more difficult than they imagined. Of all the Greek heroes who fought at Troy, none faced a more difficult journey home than Odysseus. While other warriors reached their kingdoms in days or weeks, Odysseus wandered for 10 years, facing monsters, gods, and impossible choices, all because he had angered Poseidon by blinding the god's son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. Homer's Odyssey tells this epic tale, a story as famous as the Iliad, but focused on one man's struggle to return home against overwhelming odds. The first stop after leaving Troy was the land of the Cicones, where Odysseus's men sacked the city of Ismarus. They stayed too long celebrating their victory, and when the Cicones' allies arrived, many Greeks died in the resulting battle. This established a pattern that would repeat throughout the journey. When the crew showed discipline and followed Odysseus's leadership, they survived. When they gave in to impulses and ignored warnings, they suffered. From there, a storm drove them to the land of the Lotus Eaters, where the inhabitants consumed a narcotic flower that made them forget everything, including their desire to return home. Several of Odysseus's men ate the lotus and had to be dragged back to the ships by force, weeping because they wanted to stay in that drugged paradise forever. Next came the island of the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants who lived in caves without laws or civilization. Odysseus and 12 men entered a cave filled with sheep and stored cheese, planning to wait for the owner to return. That owner was Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, who sealed the cave with a boulder and ate 2 of Odysseus's men for dinner. Over the next 2 days, Polyphemus ate more Greeks, while Odysseus devised an escape plan. He got the Cyclops drunk on wine they had brought from their ship, then told Polyphemus his name was Nobody. When the giant passed out, Odysseus and his surviving men heated a wooden stake in the fire and drove it into Polyphemus's single eye, blinding him. The Cyclops' screams brought other Cyclopes to investigate, but when they asked who was attacking him, Polyphemus replied, "Nobody is attacking me." So they left, thinking him made. The next morning, Polyphemus rolled back the boulder to let his sheep out to graze, feeling each animal's back to ensure no men were riding them. But Odysseus had tied each of his men under the belly of a sheep, where Polyphemus couldn't feel them. They escaped this way, taking some of the Cyclops' flock with them. Odysseus made a fatal mistake as they sailed away. Unable to resist boasting, he revealed his true name to the blinded Polyphemus. The Cyclops prayed to his father Poseidon for vengeance, cursing Odysseus to wander lost for years, lose all his companions, and return home to find his house in chaos. Poseidon heard this prayer and determined to make it come true. Next, they reached the floating island of Aeolia, home of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. The god gave Odysseus a leather bag containing all the winds except the west wind, which would blow them home to Ithaca. They came within sight of Ithaca's shore when Odysseus, exhausted from steering, fell asleep. His men, curious about what treasure Odysseus was keeping from them, opened the bag. All the winds rushed out at once, creating a storm that blew them all the way back to Aeolia. Aeolus, angered that they had wasted his gift, refused to help them again. They sailed to the land of the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals who destroyed all but one of Odysseus's 12 ships by hurling boulders down on them from the cliffs. Only Odysseus's ship escaped because he had cautiously anchored outside the harbor. The survivors reached Aea, island of the sorceress Circe, daughter of the sun god Helios. When Odysseus sent a scouting party, Circe invited them into her palace and transformed them all into pigs with her magic. Only one man, Eurylochus, had waited outside and escaped to warn Odysseus. Odysseus set out alone to rescue his men. On the way, he met Hermes, who gave him a magical herb called moly that would protect him from Circe's spells. When Circe's magic failed to transform Odysseus, she was both shocked and impressed. Odysseus drew his sword and forced her to restore his men. Circe agreed and became their generous host. Odysseus and his crew stayed on Aea for a year, feasting and recovering from their ordeals. When they finally prepared to leave, Circe gave them crucial information and warnings. First, she told them they must travel to the underworld to consult the prophet Tiresias about how to reach home. Second, she warned them of the dangers they would face after leaving the underworld: the sirens, the clashing rocks, Scylla and Charybdis, and the island of Thrinacia, where the sun god's cattle grazed. The descent into the underworld was unlike any other trial. Odysseus and his men sailed to the edge of the world, where the land of the Cimmerians lay shrouded in eternal mist. There, Odysseus dug a pit and performed sacrifices, allowing the blood to pool. The shades of the dead, drawn by the blood, gathered around him. He spoke with many spirits, including his mother, who had died from grief, believing he would never return. He met Agamemnon, murdered by his wife and her lover upon his homecoming. He saw Achilles, who told him that he would rather be a slave among the living than a king among the dead. Finally, he consulted Tiresias, who prophesied his future and warned him above all else not to harm the sun god's cattle on Thrinacia. Returning to the world of the living, Odysseus and his crew prepared for the trials ahead. First came the sirens, creatures whose beautiful songs lured sailors to crash upon rocks. Following Circe's advice, Odysseus had his men plug their ears with beeswax. But Odysseus himself wanted to hear the siren song, so he had his men tie him to the mast and commanded them not to release him no matter how much he begged. As they sailed past, the sirens sang of knowledge and glory, promising to reveal all the secrets of the Trojan War and the future. Odysseus strained against his bonds, desperate to reach them, but his men rowed on and they passed safely. Next, they faced the choice between the wandering rocks, which only the Argo had ever navigated successfully, or the strait between Scylla and Charybdis. Odysseus chose the latter, though Circe had warned him it meant certain death for some of his men. Charybdis was a whirlpool that swallowed the sea 3 times daily, while Scylla was a 6-headed monster dwelling in a cave on the opposite cliff. Odysseus chose to sail closer to Scylla, reasoning that losing 6 men to her 6 heads was better than losing everyone to Charybdis. As predicted, Scylla snatched 6 of his men, devouring them while they called out Odysseus's name. It was the most painful moment of his journey, watching men die while he could do nothing to save them. They reached Thrinacia exhausted and low on supplies. Odysseus wanted to sail past the island entirely, remembering Tiresias's and Circe's warnings, but his crew begged to rest there. Odysseus agreed, but made them swear not to touch the sun god's sacred cattle. For a month, favorable winds failed to blow, and their supplies ran out. Odysseus went inland to pray, and while he slept, Eurylochus convinced the starving crew to slaughter some cattle, promising to build a temple to Helios when they returned home. Helios discovered the slaughter and raged to Zeus, demanding vengeance or threatening to take the sun to the underworld. Zeus promised justice. When Odysseus awoke and found what his men had done, he knew they were doomed. They set sail, but Zeus sent a storm that destroyed the ship. All the crew drowned except Odysseus, who lashed together the broken mast and keel and floated on them, drifting for days. A current carried him back to Charybdis, which swallowed his makeshift raft. Odysseus grabbed a fig tree growing on the cliff and hung there until Charybdis regurgitated the timbers, then dropped back down and paddled away with his hands. He drifted for 9 more days until he reached Ogygia, the island of the nymph Calypso. Calypso fell in love with Odysseus and kept him prisoner for 7 years, despite his constant longing to return home. She offered him immortality if he would stay with her forever, but Odysseus refused, preferring a mortal life with his wife Penelope in Ithaca to eternal life with a goddess on a paradise island. Finally, at Zeus's command, prompted by Athena, Calypso released him. She gave him tools and materials to build a raft, and he set sail once more. Poseidon, returning from a trip and finding that the gods had helped Odysseus, was furious. He sent a storm that destroyed the raft and nearly drowned Odysseus. A sea nymph took pity on him and gave him a magical veil that kept him afloat. He swam for 2 days before washing ashore in Phaeacia, more dead than alive. The Phaeacians were a people beloved by the gods, and their king, Alcinous, was generous and honorable. His daughter Nausicaa found Odysseus and brought him to the palace. There, Odysseus finally told his story, explaining who he was and how he had come to their shores. The Phaeacians, moved by his tale, gave him treasure and a ship to carry him home. The Phaeacian ships sailed with supernatural speed, and Odysseus slept through the journey. The crew left him sleeping on Ithaca's shore with his gifts piled beside him. When he awoke, he didn't recognize his homeland at first, but Athena appeared and revealed herself, promising to help him reclaim his kingdom. For Odysseus's house was indeed in chaos, as Polyphemus had cursed. Over 100 suitors had invaded his palace, consuming his wealth and pressuring Penelope to choose a new husband, convinced Odysseus was dead. Penelope had held them off for years with a clever trick. She said she would choose a husband when she finished weaving a funeral shroud for Odysseus's father, but each night she unraveled the day's work. The suitors eventually discovered her deception and now demanded she choose immediately. Athena disguised Odysseus as an old beggar, and he went first to his loyal swineherd Eumaeus, who gave him shelter. There he met his son Telemachus, grown to manhood in his absence, and revealed his identity. Together they plotted to reclaim the palace. Odysseus, still disguised, entered his own home and endured insults and abuse from the suitors, testing which servants remained loyal. Penelope, not recognizing her husband, announced a contest. She would marry whoever could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. All the suitors tried and failed. Then the old beggar asked to try. The suitors mocked him, but Penelope allowed it. Odysseus strung the bow effortlessly and shot the arrow through all 12 axes. Then he threw off his disguise and, with Telemachus and his loyal servants, slaughtered all the suitors. The battle was fierce, but with Athena's help and their righteous cause, they prevailed. Odysseus was reunited with Penelope, though she tested him one final time by saying she had moved their bed, which Odysseus knew was impossible because he had built it around a living olive tree. Only then did she accept that he was truly her husband returned. Odysseus had finally come home. 20 years since he left for Troy, through war and wandering, loss and suffering, the hero reached the end of his odyssey. His story became legendary, a tale of perseverance, cleverness, and the human desire to return home, no matter the obstacles. It showed that heroes were defined not just by strength or glory, but by endurance, loyalty, and the refusal to give up hope, even when all seem lost. As the dawn of morning begins to break, as the first birds start their songs, as the world slowly awakens from slumber, we come to the end of our journey through these ancient stories. From chaos to creation, from the war of Titans to the glory of Olympus, from the labors of heroes to the tragedy of Troy, from Odysseus's long journey to his homecoming, these myths have guided us through the night like stars guiding ancient sailors across dark seas. These stories that were born 3,000 years ago in the sun-baked hills of Greece continue to resonate today because they speak to something fundamental in human experience. They explore love and loss, pride and humility, courage and fear, justice and vengeance. The gods, for all their immortality and power, display very human emotions. The heroes, for all their exceptional abilities, face very human struggles. And the mortals who populate these tales experience the full range of what it means to be alive. The myths remind us that life is filled with challenges, that the journey matters as much as the destination, that our choices echo beyond ourselves, and that even in the face of fate, we retain agency and dignity. They teach us about the consequences of hubris, the importance of respecting the divine and the natural world, the value of cleverness alongside strength, and the enduring power of memory and story. As you drift now into deep sleep or rise into the new day, carry these stories with you. Remember that you too are part of an ongoing tale, that your actions and choices add to the great narrative of human experience. Like the heroes of old, you face your own challenges and make your own journeys. Like them, you have the capacity for greatness, for perseverance, for transformation. If you've enjoyed this journey through Greek mythology, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more explorations of history, myth, and the stories that have shaped human civilization. Your support helps us continue creating these journeys through time and tale. Thank you for spending this time with the gods and heroes of ancient Greece. May their stories inspire your dreams and light your path forward. Good night or good morning, and may you carry the wisdom of these ancient tales with you always.